I'm talking today with educator, author, and speaker AJ Giuliani. He serves as an instructor for the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. AJ has worked toward innovative learning experiences as the Director of Learning and Innovation for Centennial School District in Pennsylvania, as well as in curriculum coordinator roles as tech director, English teacher, football coach, and K-12 Instructional Coach. His favorite role is being dad to 5 kids. You might know AJ from his books Adaptable, Empower, Launch, or the PBL Playbook. I invited AJ on the show to discuss his newest book called Meaningful and Relevant: Engaging Learners in an Age of Distraction. This is a lengthier interview than I typically conduct, but AJ and I haven't caught up in a while, and there's a lot of alignment between his work and mine, so I had a ton of deep questions that I wanted to explore. Just a heads up, we're going to go very deep into root issues as well as solutions in this one. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with AJ as much as I did. So AJ, the ability to focus one's attention has been a growing challenge for students, especially over recent years. Can you tell us what you're seeing and hearing in classrooms and the factors that seem to be contributing to these issues?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me on the podcast. Love having these conversations with you and everything you're doing. And, I think, Angela, this is the perfect storm, isn't it? Right? I don't know if you feel that way like I do, but there's a perfect storm of a lot of things that happen. And, I feel like we had all these one-to-one initiatives, everybody getting devices, then a pandemic comes. Now everybody's really has to have devices. We put everything online, learning management systems, and, not to mention the phones in everybody's pockets and everywhere. But we're seeing in a lot of classrooms right now, teachers talking about kids being distracted, apathy, and there's a famous researcher and consultant by the name of Linda Stone that coined a term, a phrase for what we're all feeling, which is continuous partial attention. And I think it's the easiest way to sum up what's happening in our classrooms and really just in our world, which is we're not just dividing our attention. We are giving attention to so many things at once. And because of notifications and just our general need to check in and kind of see what's going on, it's becoming a really big struggle. And I always do activities with folks kind of talking about, hey, this is how hard it is to learn when we multitask. Now think about your mind going 25 different directions. Kind of like the tabs that you have open. I'm looking at my computer right now. I got about 15 tabs open. Or if I swiped up on my phone, I could imagine I'd have another 15 apps that are open. So think about your brain like that. It just makes it very difficult to pay attention. And so I think what people are feeling is very real. And it's not just the kids.
Yes.
It's also the adults who are feeling this because we're living in this world too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like a lot of people kind of think the situation is hopeless, that it seems to be getting worse every year and phones are taking over our lives, more and more. And they also tend to feel like there's not a lot that teachers can do about it because, as you said, this is not a school specific or a student specific thing, but you are imagining something better. And I think that's what makes the work that you do in this area unique. What is your vision for how education can evolve to better meet the needs of learners in a world that is full of these distractions and continuous partial attention?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different avenues we can go down, and I think it looks different for different ages and all that kind of stuff. But I was turned on to the work of Dr. Mark D'Esposito, and he works at the Berkeley's Brain Imaging Center, and his research is fascinating. He basically says we have 2 competing networks happening in our brain. One is the task positive network, and the other is the default mode network. So you can imagine the task positive network is when we're getting things done, we're making progress, we're able to focus. But the default mode network is kind of what has happened through evolution and throughout history, where we are scanning for threats. We are scanning for new information. And the issue that we're having right now, Angela, is every time we get a notification, it puts us into that default mode network. And unlike people kind of thinking, oh, right brain, left brain, these networks cannot operate simultaneously. So it's like a neural seesaw, right? Task positive goes up, default goes down. Default goes up, task positive goes down. And so he has 5 steps that I think really can help us in thinking about how we can design our lessons, our classrooms, our spaces, all that kind of stuff. So the first one it talks about is a 25-5. So kind of like a Pomodoro timer type of thing, right? Where we can really only live in that task positive kind of network for about 20, 25 minutes. And with younger kids, it's much shorter period of time. But he goes, you have to give yourself time to let that default mode run. And what does that look like in the classroom? Well, we could do brain breaks, all different types of things, but you have to give time for the brain to allow for scanning in order if you want to get back to that task positive. It also doesn't help if we're just going consistently task positive to another task positive to another task positive, which happens in schools a lot. So that reflection, the metacognitive time is huge. The other piece is a threat-free zone. And by that, he means, especially in our world right now, eliminating some of these distractions. So whether that is getting the cell phones out of the classroom for a period of time, getting them away, making sure that you can snooze your laptop or Chromebook or that type of thing and get that away and actually have some focus and being put in some situations where it's threat-free. Then he also talks about scheduling scanning time just as well as we're scheduling that threat-free time as well. But I think number 4 is my favorite one for teachers, which is to create focus use triggers. So whether that's a plays list that the kids are used to, now we're in our kind of focus time we're going to focus on, or whether that is a location that we're doing something, a ritual that we're doing something, something along those lines that's going to get you into that task positive network. And so as we think about a lot of how educators can move forward, I really believe we got to look at the science a little bit and acknowledge that we can't just power through lesson after lesson, activity. That time to let our default mode process is a really big piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that teachers feel like is they're having to compete with TikTok and they're having to compete with these things that are really engaging. And I think that's valid. A challenging lesson that requires students to focus, to exert effort, sustained attention, it's never going to have the same appeal as just passively consuming something that was designed for entertainment, in 10-second bursts. So what would you say to the idea that teachers can't compete with TikTok, and what are the implications for how we can design lessons that naturally capture students' attention?
Yeah. So first I would say I agree. Very tough to compete with TikTok. very, very difficult to compete with any of these things. And they're just really good at grabbing attention. But I think sometimes we think about TikTok in these areas as just grabbing attention because it's entertainment. They did a big study. They actually shared this study on the Freakonomics podcast. And basically the study was, all right, how much will we have to pay students to get rid of social media? I don't know if you've seen this one.
Yes, I did. Fascinating.
Fascinating, right? And they were like, all right, so the kids were like, for a month, you'd have to pay us. And it was anywhere between like, I don't know, $300 to $30, that type of thing. And then they basically said, well, how much will we have to pay you if all your friends and all your family also got rid of social media for a month? And the kids actually said they would pay for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the interesting thing is it's the belonging piece.
Yes.
Maslow's hierarchy didn't go away. And to just say that social media and TikTok is getting attention because, it's this tech that's kind of, getting kids addicted. No, it's the belonging piece. That's the big piece. So when you look at the research of like how we would attempt to even compete with that, well, how are we setting up our classrooms? I always come back to the Schlechte Center for Engagement because they studied engagement for years and years, and they have 5 levels of engagement. The bottom level is rebellion. The next level is retreatism or apathy. Then the next 2 levels are what we find in most classrooms, which is ritual compliance. I'm just going to school and doing the thing because it's school, or strategic compliance, which is carrots and sticks. But his top level is engagement, and he basically defines that by 2 things: high attention, high commitment. The commitment piece is the big piece that we're missing. Yeah, if we're just competing on attention, very hard to compete with TikTok. But if we have meaningful and relevant learning experiences where kids are creating, where they're collaborating, working with their friends, they have that belonging, where they're moving into threat-free zones and all those types of things, then all of a sudden they're committed to the learning process because it's not just jumping through hoops. It's not just strategic compliance. And so that's what we have to kind of, I think, rewire in our educator brains is if we're just playing the same old game of school, we lose every time to TikTok. But if we
Mm-hmm.
make it meaningful and relevant in a way that connects to kids, brings them belonging, then that commitment piece, I think, can kind of take us past the TikToks of the world in terms of their attention grab.
I think about our approach to having technology in general, to having cell phones and things like that. And we've seen since Jonathan Haidt's book came out, The Anxious Generation, that a lot of schools have moved towards banning phones altogether, taking them out. And I find myself agreeing with that advice a lot more versus in the early days of cell phones when I was like, oh, this is great. This is going to be a whole new way to engage kids. And my thinking on phones in the classroom has really changed. Has yours?
Big time. Big.
Mm.
I mean, I'm the dad of 5 kids, and my daughter is a sophomore in high school. She uses that phone for everything, right? Connecting with friends, all kinds of stuff, and I think spends way too much time on it. My son is 13. He doesn't have a phone. He has an Apple Watch. I don't think I'll ever buy him something with a camera. Maybe when he's 18, he can buy something on his own. But I think as I've matured and seen with my own kids, and then just working in lots of different schools, it is a big distraction. I think some of the issue with Haidt's work is that once you eliminate that, so say France as a country got rid of all devices about 3 years ago, and they found that the kids still bring them to school. They just hide them. They put them in their backpacks, all that kind of stuff. And they also found that I think compliance went up, but engagement didn't necessarily go up.
Hmm.
And so my big thing is I think that there's plenty of times where having no phones is a good thing in many different situations. I also think that doesn't get rid of all devices in schools. And so there's still distractions present. And also what we notice is that merely eliminating distractions doesn't really solve the engagement problem.
Hmm.
Just kind of leads to more apathy, kids not getting, being bored, that type of thing at school, everything we've seen with engagement dropping. And I'm always reminded of some of the studies that came out because, me, Angela, I was big on Genius Hour, choice, all this kind of stuff. And so I
Mhm.
always thought for a very long time, hey, the best way to motivate kids is by tapping into their intrinsic motivation, which happens sometimes. But for many of our students, I think this missing piece is achievement.
Hmm.
But if you don't have some type of achievement, it's very hard to get motivated. I couldn't hit a curveball in 8th grade baseball, so I stopped playing baseball because I had no achievement that thought high school baseball was going to be successful. For the same way a kid in 2nd grade is struggling with reading and labeling themselves as a non-reader, or a kid in 5th grade who's struggling with fractions and division saying, I'm not good at this math thing, or a kid in 8th grade who's getting bad grades and says, maybe the school thing isn't for me. It's a big issue that I think that we have right now. There's a story, pretty famous story. I shared it on my Instagram of this guy who was in high school, and he was one of those kids, right, that we talked about, have apathy, behavior problems, all this kind of thing. And his mom is like, he's going to drop out of high school and do the whole thing. And his mom's like, can you just take the SAT? Like, I think you're smart. Like, I want to prove to yourself that you're smart. So he goes ahead and takes the SAT, and the score comes back, and he has a 1480 on the SAT.
Hmm.
And because he got this score, he's like, I am actually smart. So he goes to school his senior year, ends up going into community college, graduating, stop hanging out and doing some of the things he was doing because he feels like he has a future. And he ends up becoming this hugely successful magazine mogul. Well, it's really funny because 13 years after that, his mom got a letter in the mail, and it basically was from the SAT board saying they messed up on a bunch of people's SAT scores that year. And he actually didn't get a 1480, he got a 740 on
Hmm.
his SATs. And he tells this story, a very successful person, because he goes, my life didn't change when I got the 1480. It changed when I thought that I got a 1480, when I believed I was a 1480 type of person. And I always, because my own kids have struggled, I always am saying, when are we giving 1480 moments in school?
Hmm.
When are we giving those moments where kids actually feel that they can achieve can feel successful to kind of go through this process. And the more and more I've been working with teachers, especially in a post-pandemic world, I feel like we have to give as many of those moments as we can to kind of start that cycle of achievement leading to motivation, and then motivation leading to achievement, and so on and so forth. And it's a big missing piece, I think, right now in a lot of classrooms, and something that I think you notice in yourself personally, but often don't think about the 25 kids sitting in front of you going through that same process.
Hmm. How do we get more of those 1480 moments? What do we need to restructure to do that?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is a lot of times we're just assessing the final product, the final task, instead of the learning process and the energy, the output that kids putting into it. Think about a kid who's in elementary school and does a diorama project, right? We've all done these diorama projects. And this kid's doing a diorama project and he's working really hard on it, but he doesn't have two parents at home helping him. The teachers helped him a little bit. He comes to school the day of the project being due, and he walks in so proud of his diorama project. And then he looks around and he sees that kid looks better than his, and this girl looks better than his, and is like, starts really feeling down about himself. He doesn't know that person had their parent help them, and that person had their older brother help them, and all that kind of stuff. And so imagine being a student and just being graded on the final product instead of your guts, resiliency, your integrity, your tenacity, all those types of things. I think we have to reframe, especially our assessment process, so that we can give more of those 1480 moments that isn't tied directly to what a final product or performance test looks.
Is that grading on effort, or do you see that in a different way?
There's a lot of kind of talk about that. I
Hmm.
think the San Francisco College Track created this grit rubric, which I just brought up, which is guts, resiliency, integrity, tenacity. That's one of them, but there's plenty of them. Like Jen Gonzalez talks about the signal point rubric. And I love that idea of, well, what are your focus areas? There can be plenty of focus areas. Is it creativity? Is it independence and thought? Is it your collaboration? Whatever I think we want to assess is fine, but just assessing it based on, well, here's the final product, puts us in a hole as educators and starts ranking kids against each other instead of giving everyone that feeling of being successful, especially if they put in the time and energy. And
Hmm.
that's what I think we need to look at in today's world is, was the kid paying attention? Were they committed? Did they give that time and energy? Fantastic. Maybe it didn't turn out like some of these other kids, but they still really went through that process. Let's keep that going in the motivation train, instead of kind of being like, that's a B minus, and kind of, the kid put all this time and energy and we're holding down, or that's a C, because you didn't do one little part of the rubric. Those are big questions I think we have to have as teachers, especially in this world of distraction, because so easily kids can be turned off by the game of school.
Hmm. What role does student choice play in this? I know this is a big piece of what you've advocated for over the years. How has that evolved and changed, and how does that fit into this idea of dealing with distractions and having that sense of belonging and achievement?
Yeah, I get to work with lots of teachers all around the country, all around the world. And I always ask them to think about what their best learning experience was as a student, as a kid, or even as an adult. And then also think about like what's the best teaching experience they have ever had when the kids were so engaged. And it's funny when we do this in groups. I'm like, so is anybody thinking about a worksheet right now? Is anybody thinking about the bolded text, in that textbook? Like no one is thinking about those things. And I get they're a part of the school process. But almost every single person, when they share their stories of their best learning experience, it includes some type of ownership, some type
Mhm.
of agency. And choice leads to that ownership and agency. And when you have ownership, it leads you down that path of becoming engaged, becoming empowered, of having deeper learning experiences. It's very difficult to have a deeper learning experience if you don't have some type of ownership and agency. And so in a lot of the research I've done with choice, the worst thing you can do is just give unlimited choice, because
Right.
that also paralyzes people, right?
Yes.
It's like it's too much choice. You're like, I don't know what to pick here, right? I don't know where to go. And so you want a limited choice, but you could do choice in all kinds of things, right? You can do choice in the types of content you're learning something. So maybe you're reading something or listening to a podcast or watching a video or those, your choice in content. You can have choice in pace of learning using playlists and choice boards and things like that. You can have choice in how you document the learning process. You can have choice in the different types of performance tasks or final learning products that demonstrate your understanding and knowledge. And you can have choice in how you reflect. Ultimately, it needs to be done with purpose and limits. But I think sometimes we think about choice just in content, and there's so many other areas that we can bring it in that gets kids' attention and gets them committed to the process.
Right, and that's so much easier to do for the teacher because if you have content that you're required to teach to students, they don't get to just choose what they want to learn. But
Exactly.
thinking about how I learn it, how I complete this, how I demonstrate my learning is really powerful.
It's huge, and there's so many different ways to do that. I always think about, like, most of us as teachers, we have these standards, we have curriculum, we even have resources, and they're kind of like the blueprint to the house, right? But if you and I had the same blueprint house, if we lived in a community or row homes next to each other, our house would look different. The paint would be different. How we decorate would be different. Like all those different types of things inside the house. That's where the choice lives, especially with schools right now, because there are so many things that we have to kind of do. It's that choice inside that I think is a big piece of it.
I want to talk more about the role of technology because we've established that yes, it can be a distraction, but it can also be a powerful learning tool. How do we strike that balance between using tech to enhance learning without fostering a dependence on the tech or having kids spend even more time on screens than they already are?
Yeah, I think that I talk about this a lot when I talk about artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
that we have to live in a world where we do things that are tech or AI resistant and also things that are tech or AI compatible. And I think we need both of them, because if we just do one or the other, then we get into really a place that we're kind of leaning on these things and trusting them. So I always like think about like tech resistant things that work really well. All right, cardboard and duct tape, paper and pencil, they work really well for certain things, right? A discussion game where kids are having a conversation and they're playing a game. We do this all the time in our classrooms, where they come into class, they have an envelope that has a red card, a blue card, a yellow card, a green card, and they get to play these cards. The teacher's just calling on people. They're owning the discussion. The red card is I think. The blue card is I know. The yellow card is to pose a question. The green card is I feel. So there's these discussion stems. Kids love it. It doesn't involve any technology, but they're owning their learning process. They're talking, they're discussing in-person debates, Socratic seminars, having kids kind of do skits and things like that. These are all really powerful learning opportunities that we need to include, especially in a world that has so much technology. And on the opposite side of it, we have to look at some practices that work in a world of all kinds of technology. Like a lot of kids are plagiarizing writing. So why wouldn't we have in class writing? We would call them 11-minute essays, where the kids had 11 minutes, Hemingway style, to write their essay in front of them and turn it in as at least a rough draft or something along those process. We would do things like project-based sprints, where they have 2 or 3 classrooms to do something that would typically be a 6-week project, but we're condensing it because they're allowed to use technology in those different types of ways. There's all kinds of guided bot and space kind of conversations defending their learning. And the reason I bring all these up is, if you think about it like a Venn diagram with, AI or tech compatible and tech resistance on either side, there's also that middle ground.
Hmm.
And that middle ground include things like project-based learning, and it includes things like performance tasks, where you can pick and choose when you're using it. That to me becomes the biggest thing. Coming out of the pandemic, it was like, all right, now we use tech for everything. We have our learning management system where we're reading everything and returning everything. It became overload, right? Even the kids don't want it. And
No.
I think that's part of where we have to reflect as educators and be like, all right, let's take a step back. What's our learning goal? Does the technology serve a purpose? We're just using it as a teenage or student pacifier, right? Just to kind of keep them busy and they can be on their technology. And those are the questions that we have to come up with. But it's not like tech is all bad. There's amazing things we can create with it if it's part of that purpose, especially if it's for real-time collaboration, editing, feedback, creating, all those types of things. It's a fantastic tool when kids have an authentic purpose, an authentic audience that they're creating and making.
I think that's a great answer. And I'm glad that you brought up the AI piece because that's one of the questions that teachers are talking about a lot in my AI program, the 40-hour AI. We're talking about streamlining teacher workloads with AI, as so many of the secondary, particularly ELA teachers and others who have kids do a lot of writing are saying, I'm having to completely change everything about the way that I teach. It's a total overhaul. Nothing that I used to do works anymore because the kids are like, I can just use ChatGPT. I don't need to be able to write. I don't need to be able to do this. And they're experiencing a lot of frustration with that. What would you say to folks who are trying to manage that situation?
Yeah, I think first, take a step back. Don't freak out because I freaked out a little bit, right? Working with college students and everybody. And I want people to think about how we have changed our practice so many times. Every time there is a what I call a hinge of history, historians really call it, but I stole that term. I love it. Anytime there's a hinge of history, we change our practice. So printing press, hinge of history, had to change what education looked like, right? When that came around. You could go telegraph, radio and television. Obviously, most of us and most of the people listening to this went through a world where the only technology we used in classrooms was Oregon Trail.
Mhm.
And if you think, right, how when we were using Oregon Trail, and it was awesome, it was a lot of fun, it was a learning tool, but most of us thought about technology as a toy there.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden, think about all the different types of things that we use it for, learning, work, elsewise. Same thing with the internet. It completely transformed what we do from Google and Wikipedia to all the different types of tasks that we do online. So AI is going to be another one. The issue I think so many people are freaking out about, me included, is people at least used to have to like work a little bit hard to go to Google, find some sources, right? Copy and paste, cite things. Now they could just say, write this for me or do this math problem or all those different types of things. And I saw a talk where this woman was saying it's almost like we have to sometimes with AI reverse Bloom's taxonomy.
Hmm.
Start with creation, work our way down, evaluate the creation then synthesize what do we need to add to this of the human knowledge and our human intelligence, go down to analyzing that, looking at others, all the way back to remembering like what is important about this creation, about this learning topic, almost like kind of a reverse of it. And I've seen more and more people. I do a sprint during workshops where we do that. And when you do it almost as an adult, you're like, oh, now I kind of get it here, right? You know, as I'm kind of going through that process. And so for me, it's a learning process. I don't think there's any instructional manual for how we do it, but we do have to rethink what our assignments look like, how we're giving them. And Angela, there's a protocol that I've been using everywhere that I think your teachers should know about. If they don't, the people listen to us. And it's called the traffic light protocol. And so it's basically just set up like red, yellow, green. Red is we're not using AI or technology for this assignment. I want to see your own creating, your own thinking. Yellow is you got to get permission. And then green is I want you to use it. Like say for MLA citations and we're excited. I want you to use it. Get that done. Spend time doing other things. But giving, I think, teachers a little bit of the ability to kind of say, hey, we're in red right now, or we're in yellow right now, we're in green right now. It brings back some kind of control and purpose to the classroom. And that's, I think, something that's missing in this AI world of everything kind of going crazy.
Yes, I recommend that system too. I love it. I think it just makes it so explicit for students that this is not an inherently bad thing. It's not a forbidden thing, but it has a time and a place. And over time, students can learn to figure out where should this assignment be on this scale. Is this something where AI could be a brainstorming partner for me? Could it be helpful? Or is it going to do the learning for me? And really using that as a tool to help them think more intentionally about why am I using AI? What am I getting out of this? what was the purpose of this assignment? What am I supposed to be learning? Coming back to that piece.
It's huge. It's huge. Huge to at least think about it with that kind of purpose and metacognitive piece, especially from us as a practitioner.
Mhm. This is a little bit of a side note, but I'm thinking about the teacher right now who's listening to this and thinking, okay, so I do need to change more things in the way I teach. We've had more, what was the phrase? The hinge points in history?
Of history. Yep.
Yes. I feel like I've lived through too many of those. I am tired of it. We've had too many hinge points. I'm having to change the way I teach too many times. I'm exhausted. I don't know if I can keep doing this.
Yeah, I feel like those, you notice all those hinges of histories are happening faster and faster.
Yes.
And so this exponential piece is a really big piece. What I would say to that teacher is, in the world of all this technology, we need human connection more than ever.
Mm.
And why are concert tickets higher priced now than ever before? We can listen to any song we want at any point in time, but people want that human connection. Why are sporting events at higher tickets? I'm trying to get tickets to my Eagles game. It's impossible, right? But it's because we want that human connection. And a lot of people talk about how AI tutors are going to replace teachers and they're going to change everything. And to that teacher, I would say, let me ask you a question. Sure, it'd be great if every kid could have a tutor, but would that kid want to be tutored?
Right.
It's great that they could have the opportunity. Do they want to be tutored? Do they want to talk to a bot or do they want to talk to you? If you built that relationship. And so, of course, we are going to have to continue to evolve as educators. But, there's 4 areas I always talk about as always being important throughout the history of time in education. If you want to create an engaged learning experience, it has to be human, social, meaning centered, language based. It's got to be 3 out of those 4. And it doesn't matter if you're in Socrates and Aristotle's time or our time right now or the 1980s. It has to be those 4 things. Now, do they look a little bit different in today's world? Of course they do. But they're still what engage kids. They're still the principles and foundation of great learning experiences. And I think that teacher who's overwhelmed should say, all right, in this world of all this change and everything, what's going to stay the same? What's the human need that's going to stay the same? And if they realize that it is the fact that they need to be human and social and meaning centered and language based, those are the types of experiences, technology or not technology, they're going to engage kids. Hopefully, it'll give them a little bit of calm. I call those 4 things the sharks of education. They've been through everything and they're not going away. And I feel like hopefully it can give them some grounding of saying, I do really have a place in this moving forward. And my kids are going to need that connection with me more than ever, surrounded by all this technology.
Yeah, that's a really lovely way to look at it. I really like that a lot. And it's a callback to what you were saying earlier about, kids' addiction, quote unquote, to phones is about belonging and it's about connection. And, the study where they would actually pay to have everyone they know be off of social media for a while really related to that sense of belonging and that sense of FOMO. Like, I don't want to be missing out. If everyone else is on there are things happening that I'm missing out on. So if we know that kids have this need for belonging and we're saying, let's put away phones in the classroom, even if it's just for this lesson or for this day, although I like the idea of having them gone for the entire day so that kids aren't checking in between classes. They're not worried about what people are saying about them, at lunchtime or whatever. But they need that sense of belonging. And that's what, when I have put away my phone for a period of time and I feel that urge to check, that's what it is. I want to know what else is happening in the world. I'm only present here in this room. I want to know what else is happening and I want to feel connected to people I care about. So if we're not allowing kids to, check text messages in class, how do we give them that sense of belonging in class? How do we meet that need? And how do we address that very human feeling of FOMO? There's things happening online that I'm not seeing right now, which I guess is 2 separate questions, but they're interrelated.
Yeah, I think this is the big one for me because this is where we got to think a little bit differently about what our instructional process looks like. So you've probably heard of like the gradual release of responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is a simple I do and then, we do, and then you do, with some collaboration in there, along the way. A lot of times when we think about getting technology out of the classroom, we think ultimately the kids are going to pay attention again to the I do when
Hmm.
we're talking. We think that that's the issue. Oh, it's the tech. Well, not really. They might have been scribbling or daydreaming before. In fact, when we were in the pandemic and we had Zoom classroom, most of those kids were camera off, not paying attention. I think that's where most
Yeah.
teachers actually saw, wow,
Yeah.
the engagement is down. And so that's when I really think about, like, all right, there's always going to be a time for direct instruction. There's always going to be a piece of that. But we have to do way more we do and you do. And sometimes it's going to start with that. And then we have direct instruction in between. And sometimes we're just going to walk around and be the guide on the learning ride instead of just standing in the front of the room. If we're getting rid of phones in the classroom just for us to stand and go through our PowerPoints and our slides and give
Hmm.
tests, we're not solving anything. Kids, we're just solving stuff for us.
Right. Ooh, that's a tough one to swallow, isn't it? Like, I need to let that sink in there for a minute. If we're getting rid of phones in order to just stand at the front of the classroom and have kids, quote, undivided attention as they listen to us talk, we're not solving the root problem. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
We're not. We're solving our problem. We're not solving the kids' problem. And so, we all know kids should talk more in class. There should be more student talk and less teacher talk. There should be more creating, less consuming. But it's difficult within our current system. The way that our curriculum is set up, they're bloated because we have 1,100 math standards and all this kind of stuff. We have things that we have to cover and get through. We have state tests, whether you're in New York with the Regents or Pennsylvania with Iowa with the PSSAs, everything has that. And so I'm not faulting teachers at all. I'm being empathetic about
Hmm.
the system. But I think some of us believe that just getting rid of the phones is going to solve the engagement problem. And I don't think it is. Our meaningful and relevant instructional practices help solve that problem.
Hmm.
And that to me is the big shift that we have to make in our practice, is running everything through, how can I make this meaningful to kids? How can I make it
Right.
relevant? And there's plenty of resources and tools to do that, like never before, that are available now. And that's why it makes me kind of feel like it's a very exciting time.
Hmm. And your new book is about making this learning meaningful and relevant in an age of distractions. And I wonder if you're like me, that when I'm writing a book, a lot of times I don't know what I think or believe until I write, that the writing process actually helps me uncover something. It helps structure all of these loose ideas that were in my head that now sort of make sense. Like I'm processing. I don't wait until I know it all and then write. I'm learning as I write. And I'm curious if you can speak to if you experience that same thing. And if so, what did you discover that you like? What did you learn about your own thinking through this process of writing that book?
Yeah, this book has taken many twists and turns.
Mm.
Many, many twists and turns, but it really started with the idea that of me struggling with eliminating these distractions and eliminating technology. And does that solve our problem? And the more and more research and studies I read, it didn't solve
Mm.
problems. And I even see that there's a lot of pushback on Hate's work for neurodiverse and learners with disabilities that need this technology and need some of the assistive technology that phones and other devices take place. And so I started just having a little bit bigger and broader view. But what it came down to, that I think was the big aha moment for me, is we are now entering a kind of phase in education where kids can do anything at home faster than ever before, and it doesn't ever have to be their own.
Mm.
So, how do we create a system of learning that is mostly done in class, that connects to kids' interests, and also covers our standards and that type of thing? And the one thing that kept on popping up over and over again when I was looking at the research and all that kind of stuff, that just it kept on jumping out to me over and over again, is most folks think that rigor prepares kids for their future. And I think in some cases it does. But what we found is a lot of the practices that we're doing have no effect on transfer. So there's this big study they did at Morristown and a bunch of other schools where they took all their kids that took a final. And these were high performing students for the most part. I think the average final score was like a B minus, which is pretty good for a final. The kids took it in June, then they all took the final again in September. What do you think the average score was? Same final, same kid. Got all the way down to an F.
Oh no.
And there was not one kid that got an A. I mean, there was
Huh.
plenty of kids that got 100 and all that kind of stuff. And so like that to me started this process of what's our goal? Is it to see if the kids know something right now in this very moment? Or is it for kids to develop knowledge and understanding and skills that they can transfer in the future? If that's our goal, then a lot of our current practices aren't really practical. We can give kids challenging tests and all this kind of stuff, and maybe some of them get A's and some of them get F's. But if 3 months later, every kid's going to get an F, even our highest performing ones, what have we done? What has that all been for? And so that really came out of a lot of the research I was looking at and really made me think differently, especially about assessment and how to craft performance tasks that are both meaningful and relevant, but then also lead to transfer. And that was one of the biggest ahas for me. I thought it was going to be a lot about instruction and getting kids' attention, but a lot of it ended up being about transfer and how we can do a better job of kind of creating performance tasks that lead to transfer.
Hmm. That answers a question that I've been mulling over a lot in my mind, which is the problem of rigor, about how to me, it seems like we're asking students to do more and more compared to what we were asking them to do decades ago. That as they say, like, kindergarten is the new first grade and so on. Like, I think we're asking a lot. There are segments of people who feel like actually we're dumbing things down and making it too easy for kids. But I feel like when you compare what schools were expecting of kids and the broad um, diversity of needs that we are attempting to address now compared to, say, in the 1950s or even the 1980s. We're really attempting to do more. And rigor is such a huge word, and make it challenging. And that somehow it's not the answer. And I think what you're talking about here really hits on why that is.
Yeah, especially I think the way we define rigor, right? So when we talk about teaching kids how to read, we use the term zone of proximal development a lot.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, that falls off after like second or third grade. But that should be always what we're looking at when we're creating learning experiences. Because if I was learning how to play tennis, it wouldn't help me to play Serena Williams because that's a much higher level than I'm at.
Right.
It also wouldn't help me to play my 10-year-old son because it would be a much lower level. I need to find someone who's a little bit better than me or at the same level in order to kind of, grow. And we like know this in sports and in music and all these other areas. But for some reason in school and learning, we need to develop more of those zone of proximal learning. Rigor is just a term for having kids struggle, which isn't a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a place and time for it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's your struggle looks very different than my struggle. And so a lot of kids then end up labeling themselves, and the achievement gap kind of goes through and through. And even our highest performing learners, our kids that are getting A's, they're the ones in most of the research that came out that are struggling with so much mental health,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
all those different types of things. And it's from a lot of times that rigor. So if we look at it from a whole child perspective and a transfer perspective, really, where's the rigor helping us? Like who's that helping? What problems is that solving? I think it does a lot more harm than good when we're just doing it for the sake of creating that struggle.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big advocate in teaching students how to monitor and meet their own needs in the classroom so that the onus isn't on teachers to figure out how to differentiate and personalize every single thing for every student. I'm wondering if that's something that you talk about too in your work, and if there's any strategies you suggest for helping students to develop their ability to focus and to self-manage, self-advocate, self-regulate in the classroom.
Yeah, this is a huge one, and depending on kids' background, the upbringing, so many different types of things. There's so many different levels of this. In this book right here, Empower, that John Spencer and I wrote, we ask a question that I think we should always start with, which is, what decisions am I making for kids that they should be making for themselves, that they could be making for themselves? So I start with that question. And then if there's answers to that question of different things they should be doing, how can I scaffold? Right? I can't just throw them into the deep end here. I want to scaffold that process. So what does that look like? Are we doing chunk and checks? Are we doing different types of conferences? John Spencer talks about 3 different types of conferences. I love it, right? There is the feedback conference where the kid's asking questions and the teacher is giving feedback, right? Then there's a reflection conference where the teacher's asking questions and the kid's reflecting on their learning process. And then there's like the Master Your Proficient conference, which is a back and forth conversation. You got to work your way up to that. And so a lot of times when we scaffold, we have to think about, well, what are we doing as a teacher, as the guide, to help kids develop this? What kind of protocols and structures and strategies are we putting into place? It's why I love things like the scientific method or the inquiry process or the engineering design cycle or design thinking, because it gives kids a process. And when they have a process to follow, you actually are able to self-regulate a whole lot better than just a teacher saying, hey, you need to go do this on your own. So no, give us a process, give us a structure. And I think kids do a much better job of that kind of self-regulation and self kind of dependence in that type of environment.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for teachers who are looking to build long-term habits of engagement instead of just relying on short-term tactics or gimmicks?
When I wrote this book, I set out to find like serious, here's what you do: this strategy, this strategy, this strategy, this strategy. And I realized in the research that I kind of was doing it all wrong. I was trying to create an IKEA product uh, environment for teachers where, hey, you can just take these steps, follow these exact steps, and you're going to get engagement or something like that. And I realized that the IKEA method is just not going to happen. There's too many variables at stake, right? Your class could be so much different than my class. Age is so different. Subjects so different. Where you're going to school, who's in your class, all those different types of things. And so I liken it less to IKEA and more to like building a childhood fort, where you're going to try stuff. Some stuff's going to work and stick. You're going to try other things. It's not going to work, but you're going to figure out what works for your environment. A fort is best because it's coming from the environment. Whether you're doing it in a tree or you're doing it in couches of your house, it comes out of the environment that you create the fort. And everybody's fort looks a little bit different.
Yeah.
But your fort's going to work for you once you try stuff and figure out what you can do. And so I think that process is a much better way to think about it, rather than like this IKEA, follow these 7 steps and everything's going to turn out the same.
I love that. I love that analogy. I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
I want to close out the show with a takeaway truth. What is something that you wish that every teacher understood about engaging learners at an age of distraction?
So I would say, I was looking at this question, I was really being like, oh, this is a lot of pressure on me here. But I think the big takeaway truth is our learners are different because their lived in experience is different. When I was growing up, the only insights I had into the lifestyles of the rich and famous was watching MTV Cribs. My only thing where I was like, oh, this is how rich people live and this is all this kind of stuff. And I remember seeing the mansions, the cars. I loved seeing what was in the fridge, the pantry. That was the best part of it. And I grew up in a small town. I had 2, what I would say, rich friends. One's parents were doctors. They had an in-ground pool, which we hardly ever got into, but it was pretty amazing. I had another friend whose dad was a lawyer, and he had like the new Nintendo or Sega. And so when I was growing up, Angela, probably like you, and probably like a lot of people who listen to this, when I was told by my parents I should go to school, I should pay attention in school the whole day, I should do my 1 to 2 hours of homework every single night, because that was going to be the best path to get good grades, graduate, get into college, get a good job, have a good life. I believed them. Now, I didn't always follow their advice, but me and my friends, for the most part, believe that story. When we tell our kids that story today, which I think most schools do, and most parents probably are still trying to do that, I try to. They're like, hey, I got this phone in front of me, and on this phone that you pay for, thank you very much, I follow thousands of people on TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube. And those thousands of people are making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from putting makeup on,
Mm.
from playing video games, from doing dances, not even good dances, right? And I think that's so powerful for us to think about, because they're going to school and most of our kids are saying, I can do anything in the world and make money doing it.
Mm.
There's never been a time before in history like that. It's such a rewiring of how we think about the future, how we think about success, and especially how we think about school, which was this institution that was supposed to be a bridge to a successful life for anybody that wanted to go through it the right way, at least as we kind of call it the right way. And I think as teachers, as parents, as educators, as anyone dealing with this generation of kids, we have to ask the question, why would they do our assignments, take our assessments, care about our kind of school-based future, unless they cared about the learning, unless they cared about what they were doing? And I think it's never been more important to actually help kids care, help things be meaningful, help it be relevant, because we're going to lose the attention battle. We'll lose the commitment battle. And just kind of playing that same game of school doesn't work in today's world, now that they have the world at their fingertips and follow so many people going down so many different paths. So how do we adjust? What does that look like? And I think that's going to be the big question for the next decade, is how does education adjust? Can we adjust and stop telling the same story? And by the way, Angela, that story didn't never work for all groups of people. There always were people that story didn't work for, even though we told that story over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to be the new story in education? What's that going to look like in your classroom? How are you going to give your kids achievements for the motivation? How are you going to create some of the boring things in our curriculum to be meaningful and decorate the inside of your house, and all the different analogies that we talked about today? Because if we don't, we're dealing with a generation of kids that have so many options like never before. A hinge of history, artificial intelligence, that is on the back of another hinge of history that has led to all this distraction. And I think for all of us, it's like, how can we be humans and be empathetic to our students and their circumstances and create meaningful and relevant learning experiences so that teaching is also fun for us, because the kids are engaged and